Hello BookTube! I am here today to film a review for the book North and South, which was written by Elizabeth Gaskell. I read this book as a buddy read with Amy over at From the Dusty Bookshelf. I will leave a link to her channel down below because she is amazing, and if for some reason you don't know about her, you should check her out. So Amy approached me a few weeks ago and asked if I was considering doing Victober, and I said I hadn't really thought about it, and she asked if I maybe wanted to do a buddy read with something along that theme, and I suggested North and South because this is a book that I've been meaning to read for quite some time. I've heard the tagline as Pride and Prejudice, but for socialists. And that really appealed to me because I personally don't like Pride and Prejudice just because I think it kind of is like socially unaware. I think it's an amazing book, but it's just not to my personal taste because it kind of feels a little bit elitist to be reading about like Lizzie and Mr. Darcy's romance while, people are starving in gutters. And that's just like my personal taste. I do think it's a great book, but it's just like not my thing. So I thought, if there's a similar book, but it does deal with issues of class and poverty, and labor unions and exploitation, that would probably be right up my alley. Okay, so I did order this book online because my library only has one copy of North and South for the entire city, and unfortunately it came yesterday, and I had finished the book on Friday, so I did listen to it as an audiobook, and I'm just holding this up for visual effect. Overall, I did really like North and South. Basically, if you are unfamiliar with the plot, it is about a young woman named Margaret Hale. Her father is a clergyman, and he has a crisis of faith and decides to leave the church because he believes he can no longer ethically basically preach when he doesn't believe it anymore. And they move from the south of England to a small manufacturing town called Milton, and her father becomes a private tutor. So while previously her family had been kind of like on the lower edges of the upper class, now they're kind of on like the upper edges of lower class, where they've come down several social notches, but and they've lost a lot of their status in their home and everything, but they're still doing better than most of the factory workers in Milton. So a lot of the book is Margaret sort of being exposed to both the upper class of Milton, who are basically like the capitalists, the businessmen who own the manufacturing plants, but she also has relationships with people who work in the plants, and so she kind of sees both sides. And when there's strikes because people want to join unions and want to fight for better wages and that sort of thing, she does see both sides of the argument, because one of her father's students is one of the businessmen who owns the factories, and he tells her about how if he has to raise wages too much, then then the entire factories will shut down because they'll have to raise the prices, and then they'll lose out on business to American factories. But at the same time, she hears from the lower class people who say, hey, I can't afford to feed my family, so they're also very motivated. It really is quite fair, but at the same time, it is quite fair to both sides, but it isn't but you still very much get the sense that the people who are mostly in the right are the people who are fighting for better wages. The romance between the two characters they're very different people, but they have, I would call them like flip sides of the same coin, because they have very different values and very different backgrounds, but they're both so passionate about what they're working for and about like what they are and about their like respective causes, uh and just like the tension between the two characters is so well done. I remember I saw on Twitter a while ago that someone said like the reason why she only reads YA is because she doesn't like to read about like sex and romance. And one person pretty much said, have you tried Victorian literature? Because they really know how to create sexual tension without like any hint of impropriety. I mean, Gaskell would go on for pages and pages about, you know, the glances between the two, like the two like romantic protagonists, and she would, and also the male romantic interest. She would. I'm trying not to say who he is, but if you've read the book, you know. But for spoiler reasons, I'm not mentioning it. But he. Margaret does not shake his hand the first time that they met, and he's a little affronted by it. And through sort of a series of coincidences, she doesn't shake his hand for quite some time after they've made each other's acquaintance, and he just wishes for it so badly. And when they finally do shake hands, it just makes his evening, and he's just ecstatic and like overwhelmed with like passion basically. And Margaret doesn't even like, she just didn't even notice. It doesn't even register in her brain. And I think, and not only was I basically like rooting for them to shake hands for like 200 pages, but I also really, I thought that was really cleverly done, because often when you're in like a romantic relationship, or if you like someone or something, they, something that matters like so much to one person will be so inconsequential to the other person. So I thought that was quite cleverly done. Overall, I did give this book 4 out of 5 stars. It wasn't perfect. The one thing I would have liked is, I mean, the book is basically like 530 pages, but it kind of ends a bit abruptly. I mean, it does end happily, as I think everybody expects, but after, like, but it just ends so abruptly. Like, I would have liked to see them, like, basking in that happiness a little bit. And there are a few proposal scenes in this book, and in every one, like, no one explicitly like asks the characters to marry, like the protagonist to marry him, and I'm kind of and I'm a little like socially oblivious, and so he, like, a character would say like, you matter so much to me, and I have a very important question to ask you, and then and the narrator would say like, Margaret considered his question most poignantly, but she could not bring herself to give an affirmative answer. And I'm like, oh, he's asking her to marry him. But like, Gaskell would never explicitly say like the words, will you marry me? So and especially for because she would go on for like 5 pages about a series of glances that the characters would have back and forth with each other, where they were like, she would look at him and he would look at her, but they would both not look at each other at the same time, and so they both thought they were ignoring each other. And like, yeah, like, I'm glad that she did that, but at the same time, like, oh, the proposal scenes took like 2 paragraphs? I mean, I've been reading for 530 pages to get up to this moment. I would like you to like to just indulge me and give me so much about this, like, just let me bask in the glow of their happiness, pretty much, you know? And when it hurts so much for someone to actually say the words, will you marry me? I need some like clues as to what's going on. Yeah, so that's like my only, that was like the one thing that like kind of bugged me. I just wanted a little bit more from, some of the proposal scenes. But yeah, overall, I really did enjoy it. There were a lot of similarities to Pride and Prejudice. And Mr. Darcy proposes to Lizzie for the first time, and she turns him down, basically, and just says, like, nope. There's a similar scene in here, and this book was written like 40 years after Pride and Prejudice. I did look it up because I was curious, and I don't think that like Gaskell was copying or plagiarizing Pride and Prejudice. I just think, you know, hey, in Victorian literature about upper class people, there's a limited selection of things that you can do and that you can write about because, I mean, they're so proper. There's not a lot of stuff that they do. So I did think, but it was interesting to like see the parallels between this and Pride and Prejudice. Like when we're just basically building for the tension for Margaret and this character to finally have a handshake. It did remind me of in Pride and Prejudice when Mr. Darcy lifts Elizabeth into the carriage, and then she like turns to look at him, and then he walks away and just like stalks off. But then you see his hand, and his hand is just like clenching back and forth, and he's trying to shake it out, and just like that little moment just tells you so much. And I kind of felt similarly about this, where just I was just rooting for a handshake so much. So yeah, overall I did really like this book a lot. I thought it was very like socially aware, and I did like it more than Pride and Prejudice. I will probably reread this at some point in the future, and again, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I would recommend that you pick it up if you're interested in something for Victober, or just Victorian literature in general. Read it whenever you want. It's up to you. Okay, I will see you guys next time, and thank you for watching.